Welcome to The Lead Climb, the podcast where we break down the strategies that drive patient acquisition and growth in behavioral health. Hosted by Growth Sherpa Consulting, we bring you expert insights on digital marketing, admissions, business development, and more, so your treatment center, mental health clinic, or private practice can thrive. Whether you're a CEO, admissions director, or marketing pro, this is where you'll find the tools to scale smarter. Follow us up the mountain. Let's lock in.
Hey, appreciate everyone joining us again today. Today I have a longtime friend and partner from this field. I mean, we've known each other, 8, 9, 10 years now at this point. Julian McKean with ProHealth Recruitment. So Julian, welcome to the pod.
It's a pleasure, Steve. I thank you for having us, and looking forward to really kicking this off and talk about all the challenges, all the things that we're overcoming in our industry from a recruitment perspective. But it's been quite a ride in the past 8 years.
Yeah, tell me about that. You and I started talking a long time ago. I think back when I was still in the field even, or might have just been getting out of the field. What have you seen change for the industry, outreach, or any other position?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in the last, and just to bring it back even further, Steve, I think I actually tried to recruit you about 9 years ago. Wasn't quite successful, but you certainly worked a good route, and look where you are now. But we've seen a lot of change. It's been quite an adventure in the last 8, 9 years where I've exclusively recruited in this industry. I think it's now becoming a lot more professional. I think you're seeing a lot of startups that we're working with all over across the country. So it's ever so evolving every day, and we can certainly talk about the minutiae and little details that we're seeing on our end, but we're excited. I think there's a lot of good change out there.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed more so over the last, I don't know, maybe year, two, is investors from outside the space, not necessarily private equity or VC, but someone who's successful, maybe nursing homes, real estate, other healthcare practices, some kind of aligns a little bit, coming to the space and opening up, in particular, outpatient programs, but we see some inpatients as well. And starting from scratch, I see a lot of that. I see a lot, and I think this has always been the case of people who've been in the space for a while and want to open up their own programs. They might have worked in outreach or been a clinical director and then starting their own program. But both have the same problem off the jump is how do you staff a full treatment center while you're earning no money yet, and you have your licensing, your credentialing, you're buying chairs, you're renting buildings. How do you work with folks that are doing that? How do you consult with them and say, this is the path to your biggest success? I know that I have some of my thoughts on the outreach, marketing, and mission side of things, but where do you typically begin with them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I would say right now about 20 to 30% of our business are these small operators, these new investors that are coming to the business that really don't have the background of behavioral mental health care. And maybe it's, real estate, or a lot of coming out of assisted living and hospice space. So they approach us kind of twofold. We're linked up with a lot of different consulting firms that will bring us in and say, hey, we have this client that is looking to open up a facility in, let's just say Springfield, Massachusetts. They don't have the experience. They're going to open up an IOP, a PHP, and a outpatient program. They need 3 things, and those 3 things really consist of your clinical director that sometimes will act as your initial executive director off the bat, and then of course maybe a therapist or a clinician that will tie in. Sometimes a lot of it is that clinical director wearing multiple hats and of course carrying the caseload initially, but they really need a director of business development. I say director of business development, but it's a true BD role. So that's really the 2-3 positions that I think are crucial to get those things off the ground. But we're doing a lot of it. And, although the owner operator may not have the experience, they will typically rely heavily on, that executive director, that clinical director to come in. So when you recruit for those roles, it's, yes, we can find a very qualified clinical director, ED, that, has been there, proven themselves. But most of the time you have to find that tough skin mentality, someone that knows how to work startup, knows how to get involved in a new program that really just isn't self-sufficient, right? So they're wearing many hats, and it goes same thing for your BD person and your clinical director. It's not going to be your true BD. You're going to go out and you're representing that company. You're the image of the company. So yes, we do a lot of it, but I think ultimately it's a different type of profile. that we look for when we recruit.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about it on the BD side of things. Of course, Director of BD, I think, is the go-to title. The behaviors of that, definitely we can chat about, but the face of the program in the community is something that is often forgot by a lot of these investors and owners, right? Like and for good reason. I think you come from like dental or other industries like that. I don't know how strong the face of a dental practice is in a community, right? That might not be as important as what we do, but being as deeply relationship based and trust based as behavioral health is in particular, having a strong DBD in the field who is representing it, explaining the culture properly, doing things ethically, and also able to generate revenue while working in an environment that is somewhat nebulous, as a startup often is, often sideways or lacking systems or things that they need to have. And when I worked with some of the newer investors, you're not going to find a person who can do it all for that role. So you can find someone who's great in the field, but they might not have ever project managed a CRM go live.
Yeah.
Or you can have a VP CMO level, but they're not field anymore, right? They're not, that's not what they do. That's not what their strength is. So it's also, I think, knowing where to outsource and where to understand you might have to take an L right now. It's okay, but have a plan for that deficiency or gap down the road. And have that strategic thought versus just tactical. And that's where I coach a lot of these folks are is, you have to pick your battles when you're opening. You might not get everything right, but there's certain needs that you should have. And we always recommend you have to have a website off the bat that is effective, that explains your culture, who you are, and leads people to you. You have to have a DBD that is effective and a good communicator and high motor and good worker. And then you have to have some sort of call system to track calls and some sort of CRM to track activities. And you get those four things before you open, you're going to be in a good place, and other things you can start tackling later.
Yeah, and Steve, you hit a couple of good points there. I think it's not for everyone, especially when you work in that startup mentality. Not everyone is excited about it. And what I kind of preach to my clients is, what are you guys doing differently that every other company is doing, right? How are you setting yourself apart? Why would Joe Smith from XYZ company be attracted to joining you as a startup versus his stable job that he's doing well, he's growing, what he's obviously taking a substantial risk to join you. What are you guys doing differently? So it all encompasses the package. Whether it's a higher compensation realm, bonus structure, obviously room for growth. So it takes a special person to grow it. Again, at the end of the day, it's not for everyone. It needs someone that has having that proven track record of building programs, being successful. When it comes to BD, you're essentially the face of the company. It's a brand new company. You have to get out and build relationships and rapport. So, everyone's taking a risk to join that startup. But at the end of the day, it's if you're proving yourself and you're doing a good job and you're okay working that, small mom and pop with future plans of growth, then it's for you. So it's a very different role. It's a lot of what we do right now. So as much as it is finding the right person, it's also educating our clients on, hey, this is what you're looking for. This person may not be the right fit because they don't have the experience building programs, getting out, starting a new program, and realizing at the end of the day that this is a for-profit. Everyone has to be on the same page. A lot of times, we'll come across really good clinical directors, but if they haven't worked in that for-profit arena, it's a little different when you're joining a startup and there's a strict budget in play.
Absolutely. But I'm sure you agree. Like I love working with these programs who are also looking for a partner and knowledge and a relationship with us to not just, get people up and running and systems and websites in place, but actually learn and grow into the industry. I find that exciting. I think that's really fun to see new people join our space with passion and a desire to make an impact, and then also are open-minded enough and vulnerable enough to say, hey, I know hospice, but I might not know this. Let's talk our way through this and see how we can become successful. That's fun. I enjoy that.
So one of the things I really take pride in is when I've been working with startups now for majority of past 3 or 4 years, where I really started seeing it take off. And now when I look back at some of these clients that I have that are Massachusetts, Ohio, Indiana, where they started this very small PHP IOP level, and now they're multi-state. They have multiple locations. It just takes a sense of pride to say, hey, wow, you guys were, just a brand new player in the field, and now look at you guys. You're opening up your sixth, seventh facility. So looking back, and then you look at the people that you put in play, that first they were clinical director, and now they are executive directors of 4 or 5 facilities. It's rewarding, and I think they feel it. But again, it's a lot of trust and risk on their end to see the big picture and the light end of the tunnel.
And what I think is really cool is you do this industry long enough, someone who went to treatment at that facility that you just talked about will then open up their own facility in a few years, call you up, and the cycle continues. And that's really cool. I don't think you get that in a lot of spaces. You kind of get that here, but you don't get that in much else.
So one of the biggest, I would say, one of the biggest and best parts of my day is when you have a candidate that maybe you placed in as a clinical director, of course, at ED back in the day, but then 4 years later, they're then, VP or, opening up their own facility, and they call you and they say, hey, Julian, did an excellent job with me in my career path, and now it's time for me to open my own practice, my own facility. I've got the capital behind us, and let's go. So I'm starting to see a lot of that, but again, that's part of building relationships and trust. So it is quite rewarding for us when we have those candidates that are now clients.
For sure. Well, let's kind of stay on this topic. We talked a little bit before we started recording about the hiring quality of talent. And so, you think about the startup in particular, and this obviously applies to everyone else, but in this case, I think it's pretty interesting that we have a startup, you hire these 3 or 4 key roles, and over time, those 3 or 4 key roles are going to be hiring expanded roles, right? They're going to be leaders, they're going to be your future team leader, department heads. And so you're not just hiring, in my opinion, somebody who can do the job. You also need to hire someone who's going to grow the culture and be that multiplicative sort of force on your team. I've always looked at hiring and culture development and team building in our space as sort of an arms race, right? There is a finite amount of great talent, and finding the great talent is exponential on your outcomes, right? Having amazing clinicians who all can work together and coordinate and collaborate with each other, you get better outcomes, right? Having a outreach team that is excellent, hardworking, open, coachable, enthusiastic, you get more admissions, more revenue, et cetera. So how do you view that when you're doing the job for a program who's saying, I need a XYZ employee right now, but you are going through the resumes, you're going through all the people, and you're not finding that rock star? Like, how do you work with the programs on that? And is there a point where you say, hey, we do have to do a B plus when we want an A plus, and here's why, and here's the cost to your organization? And this is something that I think about way too often, but I'm sure you see a lot in practice, on a daily basis.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it is something that we do come across often. I think it stems with really the leader, the hiring manager in play. A lot of times when we work with organizations, it's working with your CEOs or your chief operating officer, some of the C-level executives, but then we also do a lot of work with your VPs of HR, your CHROs. What I like to do, and I think what really helps us from a recruitment aspect, is understanding the culture. What is that company like? Let's meet the hiring manager that will be overseeing this person on a day-to-day, and really understand what they like and what they don't like. What's not on the job description that's not listed, just to kind of get a good feel. But I think ultimately it's finding the person that, and let me even take it a step back. So when we recruit, I don't go out and I don't traditionally post a job waiting for applicants to come to us. I go out and I will headhunt traditionally. So it's understanding the culture, understanding the hiring manager, understanding what they like and what they don't like, and trying to find the best suitable match to fit that role. I don't ever talk to a candidate and say, hey, I've got this perfect role for you. That's just an assumption. I don't know what they want. I don't know where they want to be in 3 to 5 years. I'd like to hear from them. Hey, what makes you happy? What's going to make you wake up every day with a smile on your face and get excited? Where do you want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And if those opportunities align with what I have potentially, at that then point, I will present that opportunity. So I think to answer your question, it's really understanding your client. Every client is different. I have really good clients that I've been working with for about 5, 6, 7, 8 years, where I've put in, 30, 40 people, But the reason I'm able to be so successful with them is because I really know what they like. I know what they don't like. I know what fits. I know what, may work in the future. But a lot of times when I present a candidate, there may not even be an open role. It may just be a conversation that I have with that hiring manager, that CEO of, hey, if you come across this person, let's chat. And a lot of times I have those conversations and I say, I don't have a role for you, but I really do believe one of my clients, XYZ, would be really what you're looking for. You have all the bells and whistle. You carry and possess the same skill set. You have the same, background of where they want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's really just understanding your client, understanding what they want, what they don't like, and having a good feel for that. And I think if you have that with your client, you can be tremendously successful with finding the right people on their staff.
I agree. And I think where I come in a lot in these conversations with the executive leadership is, do you have to change who you are to get the people you need, right? So do you have to build out systems or cultural changes or provide different offerings to these talented people who are expecting it, right? So like I think very simple terms, you can say, hey, if I'm a rock star rep in the field, I want a CRM that's functional and I want a mission team that can close, right? Like those are two very basic things. And the industry generally knows if you're in the field and you know these things, you know who can do those things and provide those for you, generally speaking. But as an owner, you might not see it that way. You might not be as familiar with that. So I think from our side of things is coaching from either the very basic of, in order to attract the top outreach and admissions talent, you're going to have these things in place, all the way to you're going to have to restructure how you actually build your outreach teams out, right? Are you doing the traditional role of, I'm looking for the book of business rep and I'm going to pay them a high salary and hope, or am I going to have a developmental program because I'm large enough of an organization now and I can have junior reps and senior reps and provide new and exciting opportunities for really talented reps who want more challenges but don't want to ever be a manager or director, because they're out there and those are amazing people to have on your team, right? I mean, I know I've looked over the career for people with decades of experience who don't want to be a director, but have so much knowledge and ability and care that they should be sharing it with someone. Like they should not be quiet in a corner in a territory somewhere. So for sure, I think there's some different things to look at from the organizational side of things too. Of be who you want to be to attract the people you need to have. Um,
So
and then of course the roles have maturated. I'm sure you've seen the maturation of outreach behaviors, activities, and what treatment centers want to hire in that role.
yeah, and just I want to bring it back for a second because you did touch on
Yeah.
something that I want to comment on is that a lot of times we'll have clients that will come to us and say, hey, we need a good biz development or person that is has a good book of business, can obviously help us with referrals and bring in good solid accounts. And the first thing I look at is, well, let's look at who is overseeing this, right? And do you have a director in play? A lot of times they don't. It's kind of, I don't want to say free for all, but it's kind of out there. Maybe the sales force isn't really set up, and and things are not documented properly. So the first thing I look, and an example is I have a client in they're in Massachusetts. Won't name the company, but they came to me. They wanted a BD person, but the first question I asked them is, who's going to oversee this person? You have a staff of about 5 reps, pretty much in the regional area of the vicinity of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, but they didn't have a director in play. So I told them about kind of the nuances, the advantages of having a strong CMO essentially. And the next thing we did was we went out, we found a CMO for them, and it's been just life changing. It changes the whole approach. That person have came in, they've implemented new strategies, new approach, new ways of documentation, metrics, the whole 9 yards. And now they're about 12 people. But it was because they never had a CMO essentially in play. They only had maybe a few leaders, and the CEO kind of would step in from time to time. But now that they have that strong leader, that strong approach, it's been game changing. So I do believe having the right person in play, especially if you're a growing company and you're opening up multiple facilities, you have to have someone in play. You have to have a true director. Again, a lot of times when you work with startups, you're going to want that director to be out there, be producing, of course. But if you're a growing company and you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps, you need a true director in play.
Oh, absolutely. And I would even echo that. it depends on the type of reps you have. I've had team structures before where I would have a field-based team, what I think you would consider a general territory outreach team. You have a market, you cover it, you have that sort of responsibility. And the directors could handle 8 to 12 reps with oversight, right? You have a pretty decent scope of control over that. But then other directors would be working with a national accounts team that are calling only on unions or payers or large account hospital systems. No director should be handling 8, 12, 15 of those reps, right? You should have a smaller scope. I think that scope there was like 3 or 4 reps because the deal sizes were larger, complex. You have requests for proposals. And so thinking about those sorts of things and building your directorship or your CMO or whatever leader you put in place for that should be really custom and dependent on the actual team structure and the goals you're hoping to have with that. And I mean, it's complex work. It's very thoughtful work for a treatment center owner to say, how am I going to structure this? Because we've seen it successful with treatment centers all across the industry, many different ways. So there's no one blueprint to say this is the way we're going to do it. There's a lot of different ways of handling that. But yeah, I love hearing that that program wanting to bring in a leader to take that because that's a multiplying behavior. And there is a certain point for every treatment center where you have to go from bootstrapping to scaling.
Yeah.
And that's a painful point, but it takes extra leaders on hand to do that.
So another kind of point of that implementing someone in play is, I think this particular company and there's others that we've dealt with that kind of were in the same boat, is they didn't really have any structure in play, right? They had reps, they didn't really have regional territories, although they were growing. It was kind of a free for all. If you have accounts here, that's fine. You can, of course, utilize those. And then if a new rep is coming in, the last thing you want to do is have that rep step on anyone else's toes. So that CMO was able to come in, put structure in play, define territories, define the system, and track metrics and performance. So without having that in play, I don't see a self-sustaining biz development team. I really do truly believe that you need to have a good leader in play. And the leader that we were able to provide them is a leader that is world renowned, oversaw 40, 50 reps with, multi-site facilities, 20, 30 facilities, and has a very solid proven record. So it just comes, you have to find the right person, put them in play, find the leader, let that leader run with it and kind of prove their self-worth. So that's I think very important for a lot of these startups, especially if you're growing and you're going multi-site.
Awesome. So what are you seeing change-wise in the industry? As the candidate profile change, has the desire from the outreach or from the treatment center leadership change? Like what are the differences that you're seeing now versus when you and I first started talking almost a decade ago, back when I had brown hair, the good old days.
I'm soon behind you, so I'll be there soon, Steve. But it's changed a lot. I guess I can break it up into different sectors, right? I think from a clinician standpoint, especially with COVID, right, about 4 or 5 years ago, that has really changed the game for clinicians that have wanting to work and have worked to that remote hybrid schedule to now coming back in the office, right? And most of our clients, they want someone in the office, Monday through Friday. I think a lot of therapists are or have been used to kind of that remote profile and hybrid schedule, where that is definitely becoming a challenge for a lot of these facilities, is the challenge of finding a good therapist that can come in the office and wants to work Monday through Friday without having remote schedules. So that's been a little difficult for a lot of clients, where we'll come in and we'll, of course, trying to recruit and headhunt the right clinician. I think in biz development, in some of the things we spoke on, other than that, is they're now, I think it's emerging. I think the pedigree of the biz development has changed over the last few years, where in the past it's been a lot of more your B2B, getting referrals from other facilities, where now a lot of these, a lot of our clients, a lot of these facilities, they want true biz development folks that have a proven record, a good solid book of business, across their region, of course, wherever their territory is. So I think from that standpoint, it's evolving, where they want more folks that are really going out there and getting organic leads and getting these accounts, obtaining these clients that are a little different. Where your traditional outreach rep, back in 2016, 17, we're relying highly on, B2B. I think that's changed a whole lot. And I think the industry itself, I think it's certainly evolved. I've seen I've seen a lot of change over the last 7 years. I see a lot of my clients that have been, 4, 5, 6 facilities now bringing in PE and of course expanding that route, and that's changed a lot in the industry. But I'm also seeing a lot of these very specialty track programs. We're seeing a lot of adolescent mental health, adolescent, substance use, where we do a lot of work in, and very specific kind of niche programs. So I think you're starting to see that, and you're starting to see a lot of, and just before how we had touched on a lot of your startups, your IOPs, your PHP models that are opening up those facilities and then duplicating that, but once they're successful. So I think it's evolving. I think people are seeing the change. I think they're adapting, and certainly I think I'm excited for the future. So I think we'll see what happens here, but we're gearing towards a good year, and I think we'll see what happens in the next 2 to 3 years. But I think it can only get better.
So you bring up an interesting point about the diversification of outreach, right? Where vertical market focus has evolved or developed, or at least the intent is there, right? So I think speaking directly to the outreach reps, I want to cover a couple topics. I think first, from my perspective, I've been asked for decades from team members, like, what do I need to do to become a manager, a leader, a VP? Like, what steps do I need to take? And from my perspective, I always say, first and foremost, if you were to coach you, what would you change? Right? If you were the rep, what is it that you were coached about yourself? And that's, I think, an eye-opening moment for a lot of reps to realize, oh, I should probably go call on hospitals more, go call on therapists more. But really, it's not necessarily like the numbers from it. It's learning the behaviors, learning how do you call on different vertical markets. Can you communicate with them? Can you replicate that when you coach other reps? So for me, when I talk to reps who want to have that career trajectory, you got to do the work you're going to assume others can do, and put that work in and know how to do it so that you can help them when you get there. Otherwise, it's not going to be there. Similarly, when it comes to activities and hitting goals, I always tell people, if you're someone who desires that leadership in your career, you have to be 150% to goal. You have to be working harder than anyone on the team, because you have to expect that from your teammates, right? Like, you have to be able to show and be there. So I think that for me, those are two things that, as emerging reps want to get into leadership roles, from a behavioral standpoint for their company, they have to be doing these things. And then from a leadership standpoint, you have to be consuming leadership training one way or another. When I was coming up in the world, it was it was books on CD. I would play and driving down the road, and now podcasts are way easier, and audio books, things like that, are way easier. It was actually reading on my lunch break and things like that, and consuming 2 or 3 books a month for a decade, was a way of learning leadership that anyone can do that costs next to nothing. So I say all this to set it up. What do you look for when you see that rep who is wanting to interview for these leadership roles? Are there things that you would coach people on, saying, hey, I get a lot of this, but if you just added this to your resume, if I just saw more of this out of this rep, that would make my job as a recruiter easier to place you in these roles, but it's deficient currently. Does that make sense?
So, I think when you look at rep development, and certainly a rep that wants to go that director level role, is you need to emphasize kind of, and as I would encourage any candidate, any representative that we're working with, if that's something that you're doing, highlight it, right? Especially if you want to go that director route. A lot of times we work with reps that just certainly they're burnt out. They don't want to do that whole road warrior mentality. They've been there, they've been successful. They're ready to take it up a step notch. So I would encourage them as much as possible to emphasize that when they're chatting with a prospective client, with an organization that wants to hire a leader. A lot of times leaders look to hire other leaders that have been there, proven. But a lot of times you'll be lucky to find really good, strong operators that haven't quite been in that position yet and are ready to take that next move. So what I would tell a rep, what I would tell anyone in the business development world, if you're ready to take that next move, highlight it. If you've worked and you've overseen some of the more junior reps in the field, talk about how you've coached them. Talk about how you've been out on appointments and sat by them on calls, or joined them on meetings, and really develop those folks. I think it's important. I think if you're taking it and you want to move on to your next point of your career, emphasize it. Obviously, don't embellish it. Don't lie and say that you have done it if you haven't, but emphasize it on a resume, especially if you're applying for a director level role.
Oh, and I gotta say, for outreach, please put some rankings or numbers or metrics or growth. Not like, I can't tell you how quickly I have ignored resumes that have nothing to do with their output. I think for an outreach person in particular, marketing or admissions, knowing those numbers and showing that you have pay attention to your actual production is wildly important. For me, I will ignore resumes in a heartbeat if they don't actually show any sort of rankings or production or revenue, because it just shows that they don't focus on that, and it's a revenue generating role. You have to focus on that. So at least for me, that drives me insane when I'm doing recruiting. Person could look amazing, talk amazing, but like I don't see your focus. It's nuts.
One of the things you mentioned on earlier that kind of coming back to me now is that you mentioned about some of this training, right? When you join a company, and sometimes you join a company, especially as a representative or outreach biz development, you're kind of thrown into the wolves, right? And expected to produce right away. A lot of times, and what I found successful is, rather than our clients that are hiring these folks, instead of throwing them in, set up some training. You certainly see it, Steve, and I'm sure you, back in your days, you've seen it with some of the larger companies that you've worked for. But some of our bigger clients obviously have that capacity to train that person. They're not expected to produce from day one. They're coming in, they're allowing that ramp up, that time to really get acclimated, understand, what is the product, what are we selling here, what's different than what I've done in the past 4 or 5 years, right? They're meeting with the clinical directors, the therapists, the executive directors that they're representing, so then they can go out there and be highly successful. Where in the past, if they don't have that training or that acumen of coming in and all of a sudden expected to sell this very similar product, they can now sell a product that sets them apart from some of the other competitors, some of the other facilities in the area. So I would say, if you're looking for really good people, set some training aside, whether that's taught by a CMO or, one of the compliance or executive directors in the organization, but having that little training foundation, maybe 2-3 days a week, I think certainly will set yourself apart than any other company out there.
I gotta be honest, that was actually something that I learned in firsthand in leadership. Was I had this bias, I would say it was incorrect, but I had a bias saying that experienced and talented reps, didn't have much interest in what would be considered more rudimentary training. And I use that word cautiously, but it might be more like training 101 for a rep at a uniform rental company or a payroll systems, geography planning or call routing or scripting or closing is what we consider pretty basic stuff. And I had put together a 2-tiered training program for a program I worked at before, where it was tier 1 was pretty much all of that more basic stuff. Like, this is the expectations, this is call planning, this is how we're going to do things. And tier 2 was for people when they came back 6 months or so later, more advanced concepts. And it turned out that was actually an incredibly desirable thing when talking to tenured reps. They were excited, especially in behavioral health, that for many of them, this was the first time they've ever actually been trained. They might have worked in the field 10 or 15 years, but they've never had a training on how to properly navigate all these different little nuances of blocking and tackling in the field. And that was fascinating to me, that what I consider, just from working in different industries, standard operating procedures, was so new and exciting for these outstanding reps. I was able to build a team of really outstanding, exceptional people. And then by doing the training, we all had a shared language, shared vision, shared systems and metrics, where every person on that team was understanding how we were going to do things the whatever treatment center way. So I think that is a really cool, very affordable investment for any program to do, is put together a very simple training program. We get called in on that from time to time here at Grocery Up, and I love doing those projects, because it's fun seeing the eyes of people who are passionate about treatment and what they do. Oh, like get why, because they're learning these new things and growing as professionals. So, we talked about A players earlier. I think that's a big A player attractor.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it's a great investment, in your employee, and you see the stability, you see the tenure. Some of the larger clients, some of the clients that have these, systems in play and will bring on a rep, but then send them to boot camp or training for the first week. You'd be surprised how long those reps are still there. There's a few clients that I work with that are quite large, so they have the capacity to do your training, and they'll fly the reps in, and they'll spend a week on campus. They'll go through the training, and they come out of that motivated, understanding the product, a way to really set themselves apart than how they've been doing in the past. But then it's those reps are loyal, right? They're motivated to sell. Some of the reps that I placed 7, 8 years ago at this particular company, they're still there and they're thriving. And it's because they put these initial things in play to make those reps successful. The last thing you want to do is hire a rep, kick them out the door without really any type of collateral or marketing, or maybe they have a business card and they're expected to sell. But you'd be surprised. You set a standard, you set a time where you're going to bring these reps, invest in your people. They are your face of the company. So I think end of the day, if they're comfortable, once they're ready, they will show up big time. So I think investing in that is certainly something that I would recommend.
Awesome. Well, Julian, let me ask you one more thing before we break here. What's one piece of advice that you would give any owner operator? Anything circling around staffing? So I think that's a pretty broad topic, but we talked about a bunch of them today. So what's one lasting piece of advice that you would like to leave with any owner operator about building and growing their team?
Yeah. So, and I can answer this in 10 minutes, but I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Is when I work with a client, especially if it's a new client that I haven't worked with, is, what are you guys doing differently? And a lot of times when I recruit, candidates have multiple options. I think right now it's a candidate-driven market. I think there's multiple options. You're seeing a lot of people decline roles or accepting counteroffers, and won't go into the risk of that right now. But I think it's, what is the whole package that you're offering? What is the culture like? I think a lot of candidates that are coming in, they're looking beyond what's just your day-to-day and your compensation. It's the package. It's the culture. It's having that meaningful employee to employee relationship. It is a growth package. Is where do we see ourselves in the next 3 to 5 years? What is my growth plan? So I think all in all, it's having a good competitive package. It's giving them stability, or at least providing them stability of where they could potentially be in the next 3 to 5 years. And what's setting yourself apart, right? There's 4 or 5 other facilities out there that maybe are doing something similar, but why are we doing things differently and better than my competitor down the street? So I would think, and I try and obtain this information when talking with candidates and talking about a potential opportunity. But I would encourage all operators, all, investors, all startups, all existing clients, even ones that are multi-state and have been around for 20, 30 years, is what are you doing differently than your competitor down the street? What are the advantages of working with you and having that person having your name, your company's name on their resume? So setting things apart and really defining what it could look like in the next few years. And of course, setting culture. It's all about that competitive package. Again, I think now more than ever, having that been in kind of an upfront conversation is pretty vital, because it's a candidate-driven market. I think that's really what's going to set yourself apart than the other facility on the road.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So tell everyone where they can find you and ProHealth.
Yeah. So before we got on here, I should have kind of introduced myself, but I started ProHealth Recruitment I've been in the industry for about 9, 8 years, specifically in behavioral mental health care. ProHealth I'm a co-founder in ProHealth with my partner, Alon Fluxman. We are based in Delray Beach. Our focus, Steve, as you know, is 90% focused in on behavioral mental health care. So we work with it all, your mental health primary facilities, your adolescent substance abuse. We work with, co-occurring substance use organizations, national basis. We do anything from your clinician, therapist, master's level, all the way up to your clinical director. A lot of what we do is nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and then certainly a lot in the outreach biz development capacity. And then now more than ever, psychiatrists, medical directors, board certified addiction medicine physicians. So anything in that realm is really what we do. I would say the real thing that separates us apart from any other firm out there is, we're true headhunters. We don't go out, we don't traditionally post a job and wait for a resume to come to us. I think if a client is utilizing our services, is going to, use us to recruit, that's something they can do themselves. Our selling point is we're really good at what we do. We know how to find good staff, and it's been effective. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, my website is ProHealthRecruitment.com, or LinkedIn. You can go to Julian McKean, and certainly would like to discuss, any type of hiring need or challenge you may have. And same thing goes for you as if you're a confidential candidate that is just looking for other options and want to see what's out there. Certainly would love to have a conversation with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julian. And if you listened this long, thank you. That's awesome. I appreciate you for that. Be sure you do all the cool like, subscribes things, depending on what platform you're checking this out on. If you want to be a part of the podcast, reach out to me, growsherpaconsulting.com. But if you're watching this, you probably found a way to find me. So thanks so much. Appreciate having you, Julian. And thank you all for listening or watching.
Thanks for your time, Steve.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Lead Climb. We hope you picked up some valuable insights to help optimize your patient acquisition and grow your behavioral health organization. If you found today's discussion helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your network. And if you're looking for expert guidance in digital marketing, admissions, business development, or any other piece of the patient acquisition puzzle, Growth Sherpa Consulting is here to help. Visit us at www.growthsherpaconsulting.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The Lead Climb.